On July 18, 2014, FSU law professor Dan Markel was unalived inside his Tallahassee garage in an execution-style hit just hours after dropping his 2 young sons off at daycare. The perpetrators followed Dan that morning in a silver green Prius and shot him twice, once in the cheek and once in the forehead. Markel would die 14 hours later. It took 2 years for any arrest to be made. Ultimately, the investigation revealed a chilling motive. Markel's divorce from Wendi Adelson had erupted into a bitter custody battle. Wendi wanted to relocate 7 hours away with her and Dan's sons to Miami. Dan was having none of it. He was a family man and he loved his sons, and he wasn't about to let the Adelsons take on his role as father. So far, 5 people have been found guilty for the roles they played in this sinister murder-for-hire plot. 2 hitmen, Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera, Wendi's brother, Charlie Adelson, Charlie's ex-girlfriend, who happens to also be Sigfredo Garcia's baby mama, Catherine McBanawa, and most recently, Wendi and Charlie's mother, Donna Adelson. In today's video, I want to focus on the next person who I believe will be charged in connection to Dan Markel's death, his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson. In my opinion, Wendi began committing what I will call mini crimes against Dan Markel right from the start of their relationship, and then straight through his death and past his death as well. Thus far, Wendi has not been charged with any crimes against Markel, so she is presumed innocent. But again, in my opinion, over the years, Wendi, through her treatment of Dan and his family, has shown her true character. As they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and Donna Adelson is the tree, and she's proven herself to be a woman with no moral compass. Wendi Adelson's first crime against Dan Markel was during their wedding on February 5th of 2006. That's when she betrayed Dan by failing to come through with a kosher menu. Having a purely kosher menu at his wedding was sacrosanct to Dan Markel. And he was so mortified when he realized the food wasn't kosher that he went around to all of his guests and told them not to eat the food. Donna and Wendi had promised Dan that the food would be kosher. Instead, they gave him something they called kosher style, which, what the F is that anyway? This happening at their wedding should have been a giant red flag. In my opinion, at that point, Dan should have gotten his marriage annulled and run for the nearest exit. This betrayal was a foreshadowing of what was to come, and it illustrates both Donna overstepping in her kids' lives and Wendi's ease with lying to Danny. Don't screw over your new husband/fiancé like that. 2, when Wendi decided to divorce Dan, she didn't bother to tell him until he was out of town in New York City at a conference. Well before Dan even left for the conference, Wendi and Donna had rented a new home for Wendi and the boys in Tallahassee. They did this secretly. Wendi had also already taken a mandatory class required of all those seeking a divorce in Florida. As soon as Dan left the house for New York City, Donna, her husband Harvey, and Wendi began moving all the furniture Wendi wanted out of Dan's house and her house into her new rental. They also grabbed all of Wendi and Dan's sons' clothing, bedding, and toys, except for clothes that the boys had already grown out of and old broken toys. Along with all of that stuff, Wendi also took the 2 boys, Benjamin and Lincoln. Wendi called Dan right before he was supposed to give his speech and told him, "I'm leaving you and I'm divorcing you. It's over." Danny was blindsided. He called this his own personal Pearl Harbor. He immediately hopped on a plane back to Tallahassee, but when he stepped into the house that he had shared with Wendi on Trescott Drive, Dan found it mostly empty. No Wendi, no Benjamin, no Lincoln, no furniture, mostly no furniture. And Wendi refused to tell him where she and the boys were for 2 weeks. By all accounts, Dan was devastated, worried, angry, hurt, Talk about a betrayal. And of course, Donna and Harvey were right there facilitating all this cruelty. 3. Wendi's third crime against Dan Markel was keeping his family's Holocaust diamond ring. That was a ring that Dan had married Wendi with, but ultimately she got a different ring. The Holocaust ring was very sentimental. It was a treasured family heirloom. It had belonged to one of Dan's beloved relatives who managed to smuggle it out of Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. That ring has major sentimental value to Dan's family, and Wendi promised that she would return it. However, she has not lived up to that promise. And by all accounts, as of today, she still has not returned the diamond ring to Dan's family. That is cold. That is ice cold. That ring means nothing to her and everything to them. And her mother and her brother have been convicted of unaliving Danny. The least she could do is return that ring. 4. In 2015, Wendi legally changed her and Dan's son's last name from Markel to Adelson. That took place just about a year after Dan's murder. This would have devastated Dan had he been alive to witness it. His parents, Ruth and Phil, had to suffer that pain for Dan. Wendi also got rid of a Markel name that was given to her and Dan's son, Benjamin. Benjamin's full name originally was Benjamin Amakai to honor Dan's relatives. All of these name changes effectively erased Dan's legacy in the lives of his sons. 5. While Wendi was still married to Dan, she reportedly mocked his love of academia and his work ethic. Some people say Wendi was jealous of Dan's prestigious position at Florida State University, his Harvard education, and even in the lead up to his marriage to Wendi, Dan had asked his parents and some of his friends not to mention his Harvard education. He didn't want Wendi to feel in any way inferior. It sounds like this was a pain point for Wendi. Instead of being purely proud of Dan, she was jealous that he had gone to Harvard. What number am I on? I always forget. I'm going to say 5. After the divorce, Wendi made it hard for Dan to see his kids as much as he wanted to. For example, if she had the kids but needed a babysitter, she had her parents watch the boys. Dan had always given Wendi the right to spend that time with the boys if he had something else to do. Wendi did not extend this courtesy to Dan. 6. Wendi seemed to allow her mother to disparage Dan in front of his young sons by calling him, quote, stupid, and claiming that he wanted to take her sunshines away, her sunshines being Lincoln and Benjamin. Danny found out about this because little kids talk, and they told him, Grandma says you're stupid, and she thinks you're going to take her sunshines away. 7. Wendi also routinely served her sons non-kosher foods, such as bacon and pizza, despite Dan making it clear he wanted to keep a kosher home. Wendi was Jewish like Danny, and I suspect she may have agreed to these things early on in the courtship and possibly early in the marriage, but then decided it was too much of a hassle. Maybe she didn't like the degree to which Dan went to keep a kosher home and his insistence on it at all times. And right there with Wendi was Donna helping her along to feed the boys things that weren't kosher. This is what you call disrespect. 7. After Dan's death, Wendi limited the Markel grandparents' access to their grandsons. This was especially painful given that the boys were all that Ruth and Phil still had of Dan. Wendi's behavior toward the Markels right after Dan's death, like within days, was cold, antagonistic, and deeply hurtful. And I do believe that this points to Wendi's possible involvement in the plot to unalive Dan. She continues to deny her involvement and knowledge of the crime, but if she wasn't involved, why did she feel the need to treat Ruth and Phil Markel so shabbily? To what end? Hadn't they suffered enough? 8, trying her darndest to be able to relocate to South Florida with Benjamin and Lincoln was despicable. Wendi knew Dan's job was in Tallahassee, and she knew he was devoted to his sons and was determined to be a stellar father to them at all times. What right did Wendi and her family have to try and deny Dan the right to be a father to his boys? He wanted to be a full-time father to them, not a dad who had to get on a plane and fly to Miami or drive 7+ hours. 9. When Dan's parents, Ruth and Phil Markel, and his sister Shelley came to Tallahassee right after Dan's murder, Wendi avoided a proper face-to-face chat with them. Ruth, in particular, wanted to sit down with Wendi and find out how much her and Dan's sons, Lincoln and Benjamin, knew about their father's death. The boys were only 5 and 3 at the time, but Wendi seemed to always be surrounded by either her parents or her friends, and she made no effort to break away from them to speak privately with Ruth, Phil, and Shelley. And in fact, as Wendi walked with a friend to her bedroom when Ruth was over there, Ruth managed to ask in passing if she knew whether or not Dan had a will. Wendi replied simply no and kept walking. So rude. Ruth said in her book, The Unveiling, that Wendi made her, Phil, and Shelley feel like intruders. Along with avoiding the Markels, Wendi also saw to it that Ruth and Phil had scant little time with Benjamin and Lincoln during their time in Tallahassee. Ruth was desperate to hug Danny's boys, to feel some degree of comfort in seeing Dan's children. Wendi went to great lengths to prevent that from happening, according to Ruth. And in fact, Wendi and her parents whisked Ben and Lincoln to Miami before the Markels had even left Tallahassee. And they did it without any warning. Dan was shot on Friday, died on Saturday, was memorialized on Sunday, and by Monday, his kids were moved 7 hours away to Miami. That's what you call speed packing and speed moving. They also drove to Miami before the cops could speak to Donna and Harvey and Wendi again. And all of this was a foreshadowing of what was to come for the Markels. The Markels were kept from seeing Ben and Lincoln for many years. You know, Dan Markel ended up in Florida because of Wendi, and he ended up in Tallahassee because of Wendi. You see, Dan met Wendi in Washington, D.C. They met through the Jewish dating site, JDate. At the time, Wendi was a law student living in Miami, Florida. Dan was working at a D.C. law firm, which he ended up leaving so that he could spend more time with Wendi in Florida. Yes, he left a prestigious law firm position to go to Florida. Dan joined the faculty of FSU in 2005, a year before he married Wendi. He wanted to be near her. She completed her law school degree in Miami. And let me tell you, according to Ruth, Donna Adelson was not happy when she found out that Danny had left his high-paying position in D.C. to take a teaching position at FSU. It's hard to believe that Wendi Adelson would not be in on the plot to do in Dan. After all, who could have provided his schedule on that Friday to the hitmen? Who would know his schedule better than Wendi? And don't you think that Donna and Charlie would give Wendi a heads up if they were planning to do this to Dan Markel? You would think that they'd want her to sign off on the plan. Wendi also drove by the crime scene like just about an hour after it happened. Wendi even drove by the crime scene just about an hour after the crime happened. Coincidence? I don't think so. I think she wanted to make sure that the crime had actually gone down. That's just my opinion, allegedly. Even her brother, though, was angry that she drove over there. He said something like she couldn't keep herself from driving over there. I think Wendi Adelson is a very insecure person. She tries to present herself as a very confident, competent person. But it sounds like Dan had to dim his own candle to make her feel okay. There's no reason to treat your ex-in-laws so shabbily if you weren't involved in this crime, why be mean to them? What had they ever done to you? You can't accuse them of meddling. They live far away. Ruth lived in Canada. Phil lived in Canada for a while. I don't know if he moved to Colorado or was just visiting at one point. My gut tells me that Wendi did not want to speak to Ruth and Phil because she could not face them, knowing what she knew. She wasn't that good of an actress. It would have been hard to keep up that facade of not knowing anything, of being devastated for her sons. That was going to prove a difficult task for Wendi, in my opinion. Like if you do something bad to somebody and you know you did something bad and you sort of feel bad about it on some level, isn't it hard to go up to that person and speak to them and interact with them? It takes courage to do that. Unaliving somebody is a whole nother level. And if you're in on a conspiracy to unalive somebody, you have to watch everything you say, because one slip of the tongue could spell the difference between prison and a life of freedom. By shutting the Markels out, Wendi did not have to interact with them very much. And I also think that having her sons with the Markels would have prompted the boys to ask a lot of questions about what happened to their father. And that could take them into dangerous territory as well. I think Wendi probably wanted to forget about all of this. Make it a non-topic within the family. Maybe say that it's just too painful to talk about. But really, she doesn't want to talk about it because she might let something slip. Again, these are my opinions. This is allegedly. She hasn't been charged yet. Hey, please smash that like button. Please leave me a comment. Please subscribe. That's really important. It's a free way you can help me. And I will see you next time on Bed Crime Stories.